Secrétaire général du Forum. Vous parlez ici, si ça vous... Non, vous préférez parler ici? D'accord, très bien. Je vous en prie. André Pouna, secrétaire général du Forum des îles du Pacifique.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you warm greetings from the Blue Pacific. Mr. President, thank you so much for organizing this wonderful meeting. It's good to see and to hear so much experience and wisdom resonating in this room today. And we look forward to very productive oceans here this year, 2022. Can I please be allowed to convey our deepest sympathy and condolences to the government and people of Tonga, who are currently experiencing the devastating aftermath of the Tonga volcanic eruption and the ensuing tsunami. I also wish to thank all friends and partners who have supported Tonga so much during this critical time. May we continue to uphold them in our thoughts and in our prayers. Excellencies, the Pacific Ocean and the large oceanic states that make up the Blue Pacific are strategically important today, collectively occupying EEZs of over 48 million square kilometers and occupying the vast ocean expanse between Asia to the west and the Americas to the east. Recently, geopolitical positioning in the Pacific has increased, with major powers developing strategies for their approach to the Pacific. This is not surprising because we have a very valuable asset, and that is our ocean. But we have always asserted our guardianship and stewardship of our ocean, and have always affirmed that we are not small islands, but rather we're large oceanic states because with enormous potential because of our ocean, our most valuable strategic asset. Excellencies, our leaders and our people take responsibility for our ocean seriously. Indeed, SDG 14 was a Pacific initiative. Our proud history of collective management of our ocean resources, such as tuna, has ensured the sustainability of our fishery. We have made many ocean commitments, including ambitious national ocean policies, such as Palau's Sanctuary, Papua New Guinea's National Oceans Policy, and the Cook Islands Marae Moana Initiative. Just speaking briefly on the last one, Marae Moana in our language means sacred ocean. That is how we respect the ocean, because we see it as part of us. We see it as defining our identity and our culture. We see caring for the ocean and its resources as not just our moral duty, we also see it as our obligation under international law. Further, we submit that for ocean governance to be fully effective, all states must play their part and ensure that they abide by international law, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The nature of the ocean implies that any action in your own waters can and will have transboundary impacts on other countries' waters, as well as to our global commons. That is why the leaders of the Pacific Islands Forum are supporting an ambitious BBNJ treaty, which we hope will come into effect this year. Excellencies, for us in the Pacific, the single greatest threat to our livelihoods, our security, and our well-being, and indeed of the whole world, is climate change. One of its negative impacts for us is rising sea levels, which is already being felt in our region. Sadly, the relationship between climate change-related sea level rise and maritime zones was not an issue that was specifically contemplated by the drafters of UNCLOS, but which is of real concern to all of us now, especially the small island developing states and the low-lying states. We want to ensure our legal entitlements as sovereign nations are not lost nor challenged due to sea level rise. In August 2021, and to mark the 50th anniversary of the Pacific Islands Forum, our leaders serving maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. And I have the honor today to present that to you. Our declaration is not just another climate change-related declaration. Oh no, it is a carefully drafted, targeted document that addresses a specific issue, the relationship between sea level rise brought about by climate change and maritime zones. The declaration represents our formal collective view on how UNCLOS rules on maritime zones apply in the situation of climate change-related sea level rise. It secures our people, maintains peace and security, and upholds our long-standing commitment to UNCLOS. Preserving maritime zones in the manner set out in the declaration is essential and fundamental to ensuring a fair and equitable international response to climate change-related sea level rise. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the declaration is rooted in the underpinning legal principles of UNCLOS, in particular those of stability, security, certainty, and predictability. In essence, we are saying that whether or not sea level is rising, once maritime boundaries are set and deposited with the UN Secretary General, they should not and should never be altered. While the issue is of fundamental importance to our beloved Pacific continent, other countries, we submit, similarly require stability, security, certainty, and predictability of their maritime zones. On behalf of the Blue Pacific, I offer our declaration as a considered, moderate, and targeted solution to the issue of sea level rise and its possible legal effects on maritime zones through a good faith interpretation of UNCLOS. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we call on your support for this declaration as one solution to an extremely dire consequence of climate change. In closing, and on behalf of the Blue Pacific continent, I sincerely hope this declaration will be reflected as one of the endorsed commitments of this very important summit. I thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Pounard. Merci. Le Forum des îles Pacifiques qui regroupe plus de 12 pays. Je vais rejoindre Madame la chef de gouvernement tunisienne, Madame Najla Bouden, qui arrive de moins loin, mais néanmoins d'une région que le président connaît bien pour l'avoir souvent visitée. La Tunisie est un grand pays maritime créé par une princesse, une reine, Elissa. Dis donc, Madame Najla Bouden, à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Tout d'abord, je voudrais, Président Macron, vous féliciter, vous remercier encore une fois pour cette initiative, de nous donner aussi l'opportunité d'avoir cette plateforme d'échange. J'ai pour ma part, pour la Tunisie, un message direct à vous transmettre. J'ai préparé un mot, donc je vais le dire. Président Macron, la mer, comme vous le savez, a toujours été à la fois une partie intégrante de l'héritage culturel de la Tunisie et elle est à ce jour un moteur substantiel de son économie et une source importante de revenus pour une large frange de sa population. Et aujourd'hui, à l'instar des autres pays méditerranéens, notamment ceux de la rive sud, la Tunisie connaît d'énormes pressions environnementales et se trouve parmi les pays maritimes les plus impactés par les changements climatiques, la perte de la biodiversité et la pollution par le plastique. Aujourd'hui, les côtes, tous les aspects d'érosion côtière coûtent à la Tunisie quelque 2,8% de son PIB et la pollution par le plastique représente à peu près 2% de son PIB. C'est vous dire si les défis sont énormes. Et bien qu'elle n'ait contribué à très peu, à une très petite échelle à la pollution atmosphérique et à celle des milieux marins, notre Tunisie a toujours adhéré aux efforts de la communauté internationale pour justement préserver cette biodiversité, l'exploitation durable et le partage équitable de ces ressources. Et à ce titre, et à titre d'exemple, nous avons doublé le niveau d'ambition nationale de réduction inconditionnelle de l'intensité carbone à l'horizon 2030. Mais également, nous sommes attachés au principe onusien de la responsabilité partagée mais différenciée. Et à ce titre, nous sommes résolument engagés à contribuer à tous les objectifs universels de la protection des ressources et biodiversité maritime, la lutte contre les changements climatiques et les pollutions, notamment celle du plastique, et la garantie d'une pêche durable. Et là, j'arrive à mon message clé, c'est que face à l'énorme coût des investissements et des innovations technologiques que requiert justement la réalisation de l'ensemble de ces objectifs qui visent à faire des mers une solution durable de reprise économique, les efforts nationaux, nos efforts nationaux, ne peuvent suffire à eux seuls. Et la réalisation des objectifs qui nous entourent aujourd'hui doit impérativement tenir compte du gap existant entre les capacités des pays et prendre en considération les défis auxquels font face les pays en développement, comme ceux de la Tunisie. Et ces défis, comme vous le savez, ont été exacerbés par justement la crise sanitaire de la Covid-19 et qui ont drastiquement réduit notre marge de manœuvre pour faire face à la vulnérabilité environnementale. Donc l'efficacité de mise en œuvre de ces objectifs va dépendre de la capacité de chaque pays à élaborer des études multidimensionnelles d'impact et à financer, à exécuter des programmes de mise à niveau de son tissu industriel, de ses infrastructures. À titre d'exemple, la décarbonation du transport maritime nécessite à elle seule des programmes d'assistance financière et technique qui devraient pouvoir être soutenus par les institutions internationales et les pays donateurs. Donc, mon message, c'est que la communauté internationale se doit ainsi d'adopter sans tarder une approche globale et participative, consacrant un partenariat multilatéral et multipartite, innovant. Et le système onusien saura apporter, à mon sens, et nous en sommes convaincus, une réponse collective et efficace à la hauteur des défis maritimes et transnationaux. Une telle réponse devrait garantir un partage équitable des bénéfices escomptés de l'exploitation durable de nos mers, de nos océans en matière de développement, de création d'emplois, de sécurité alimentaire, mais également de sécurité tout court. Donc, notre prise de conscience de l'impérieuse nécessité de préserver nos mers doit nous inciter à nous engager résolument autour de partenariats solidaires et multipartites, aussi bien nationaux, régionaux qu'internationaux et qui garantissent les intérêts vitaux de toutes les nations. Monsieur le Président, merci infiniment de nous donner l'opportunité de nous exprimer avec vous autour de ces questions clés. Merci beaucoup.
Merci Madame la chef de gouvernement. Je sais que le Forum mondial de la mer de Bizerte, auquel vous assisterez, j'espère, l'année prochaine, présidé par Pascal Lamy, et que Madame Girardin, la ministre de la Mer, a honoré de sa présence au mois de septembre. Je sais que vous êtes très actifs dans votre pays et votre message, je crois, a porté. On va, si vous le voulez bien, demander au Premier ministre de la République d'Irlande de nous parler d'un autre sujet, qui est celui du verdissement du transport maritime, qui est un sujet que vous avez quelque peu abordé et qui le sera dans quelques minutes aussi par les grands Européens dans ce domaine qui sont dans la salle. Monsieur Michael Martin, je vous en prie.
Thank you. Am I on? Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, and I want to thank President Emmanuel for the invitation, the opportunity to be at this Ocean Summit today, and first of all to say this in itself is a significant achievement, and I think it underlines the importance of multilateral fora and heads of state coming together to prioritise the sea, the oceans, and in many respects, I think we should continue to have this high-level engagement, a cop of the sea, on an ongoing basis, because it's essential. From the Irish perspective, we're an island state of the North Atlantic. Our maritime area is 7 times our landmass. And this session, I think, is titled Solutions That Can Come from the Sea. And obviously, just in the first instance, I would say Ireland is very committed to research and working with our European partners and others who are partners in the Atlantic. We want to expand our research capacity and our collective research capacity. And we're developing new capacity in that regard. We have a new multi-purpose research vessel now coming on stream, named after one of our famous Antarctic explorers, Tom Crean, who 3 times made groundbreaking missions in the early part of the 20th century. So, sea is in our blood. The opportunities we see ahead of us lie particularly in the area of offshore wind. Right now, Ireland consumes electricity that's generated by up to 43% generated by renewables. Our target to 2030 is to get to 80%. And that will be dependent on the offshore wind technologies from now to then. And we have moved quickly to create a new legislative framework around permitting, a streamlined permitting system in terms of consents and so forth. That legislation has passed. We're creating a new regulatory agency to govern the development of offshore wind and renewables. 5 gigawatts to 2030, but excessively beyond that then for post-2030, so that we get into a stage where we will be exporting energy. We are developing interconnection. We will soon have interconnector with France and with Wales. And we see that as our future to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. If we look at the geopolitical situation at the moment, part of our vulnerability, and certainly from an Irish perspective, is our dependence on imported fossil fuel. Our way out of that dependence is the development of offshore wind, and particularly floating technologies into the future, green hydrogen, and greater storage capacity as well. And so we see the sea as offering us solutions, real key solutions to deal with the wider challenge, of course, of climate change itself. What is critical as well is that we do all of this in partnership with our coastal communities and with our fishers. We have to work with our fishers to ensure that this new opportunity is one that they can cohabitate with and be a part of, and that we develop sustainable fisheries, again in partnership with all of our partners in the Atlantic and within the European Union itself. And that generally is how we see this, how we see the ocean really now providing opportunities for us to deal with climate change, and in those coastal communities, those rural areas economic opportunities that they would not have anticipated for the last 30 or 40 years. Real jobs-rich opportunities for those coastal communities into the future.
Merci, merci Monsieur le Premier ministre. L'Europe est au rendez-vous du verdissement du shipping et Nikos Anastasiades, le président de la République de Chypre, ne dira pas le contraire. Je lui donne la parole.
Thank you very much. Before getting into the basics
can you
of
put your
my
microphone? Yeah.
intervention, sorry.
Sorry, all right?
It was my punishment.
Pen.
Before getting into the basics of my intervention, allow me to thank President Macron for convening the Un Océan summit. Despite other unfolding and critical issues, climate change remains one of the biggest challenges that humanity faces. And I am pleased to inform you that my country has just joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, presided by France and Costa Rica, which aims at addressing the enormous economic and geopolitical impact of climate change. Today's event provides us an important opportunity to stress the connection between climate and a wide range of maritime issues, including the sustainability of our seas and oceans. Cyprus appreciates that our marine ecosystem is a valuable resource and an integral part of our economy, not to mention our identity. It is also a bonding heritage that is shared with all the nations. Therefore, we treat all related issues as of a high priority. As a leading maritime nation, my country feels responsible to accelerate the transition of shipping to a low-carbon and climate-resilient industry. Maritime transport has, of course, an international character, while climate change knows no borders. So it is obvious that we need to act together to agree on targeted international measures. The issue of cleaner fuels, the deployment of relevant fuel infrastructure, the electrification of ships, and the use of energy efficiency technologies is the way forward. A combination of all the above, coupled with the industry's initiative and commitments, such as the Green Marine Label, does have the potential to improve the commercial and environmental sustainability of the sector. At the national level now, my government has already devised our long-term strategy for shipping under the title Sea Change 2030. Our national strategy incentivizes and rewards investments through protective and proactive actions whose goal is to accelerate the use of environmentally friendly technology and the development of non-fossil alternative fuels. Cyprus and the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East belong to the same climate hotspot, with a particularly high sensitivity to the effects of climate change. Thus, at the regional level, there is an ongoing Cypriot initiative to coordinate climate change actions in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. This project aspires to encourage and provide incentives to the countries of our region to prepare their own regional action plan on the basis of their specificities. We are also extremely pleased that after several years of systematic deliberations among the Mediterranean states through the Barcelona Convention system, a proposal has been recently submitted to the International Maritime Organization for the designation of the Mediterranean Sea as sulfate oxides emission control area. This would be extremely significant to protect public health and the environment in the Mediterranean by reducing exposure to harmful levels of air pollution resulting from these emissions. I wanted to seize this opportunity, this occasion, to reiterate Cyprus' readiness to work towards ensuring that this proposal will be approved and enter into force by 1st January 2025. In the same direction, we also urge the contracting parties of the Barcelona Convention to commence as soon as possible work for designating a nitrogen oxides emission control area in the Mediterranean area. Such a proposal is expected to minimize further the emissions from maritime transport, achieving significant health benefits and protecting the maritime environment. On the wider international stage, and as an active member of the IMO Council, Cyprus will work towards ensuring that shipping will make a meaningful contribution to the protection of the oceans and to minimizing the adverse effects of climate change. To this end, we will continue to focus on bridge-building initiatives through the promotion of regional cooperation. It is my government's and my personal conviction that the international community ought to demonstrate a genuine understanding of each other's priorities and to foster diversity and inclusion. Let me wrap up with the following. Not much can be done unless we see ambitious and concrete commitments by all. It is up to each and every one of us to prove, particularly to the younger generation, that our ambition to deliver blue diplomacy is matched by tangible actions. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président de la République. Je vais laisser le tour de l'Europe se terminer en quelque sorte par le Premier ministre de la République de Malte, Robert Abela. Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you for hosting this very important summit. What I would like to share with you today is the importance of the ocean at a practical level as seen from the holistic perspective of a small island bang in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, Malta. Well, we rely on the ocean, on the sea, for the provision of our most basic supplies, for the provision of food, most of which we import from neighboring Sicily and Italy. We rely on the sea for the provision of our fuel supplies, of our gas supplies, of steel, which is needed in our industry. We also rely on the sea for our connectivity. We're a small island state, member state in the European Union, disconnected from the European mainland. So perhaps our perspective is slightly different from that of many amongst you here today. We are also very much dependent on the sea for our tourism industry. And whilst we have a very diversified economy, it is also a fact that tourism makes up a third of our economy, tourism and its ancillary services. Let me give an example, the cruise liner industry. We're very much dependent on that. And other examples which I could cite would be our beautiful beaches, which are our number one attraction when it comes to getting as many tourists as possible to our beautiful islands. And there is also then the fishing industry, the fish farming industry, and traditional fishing, which also provide a high quality of life to most of our fishermen, a good quality income, and also good quality jobs. There is also then the maritime commercial sector, our shipyards, our provision of bunkerage services to seagoing vessels. There is also then Malta's growing marine leisure industry, which is ever growing, and it is an open secret that most Maltese people own a boat. I am an avid sailor myself. And so we have to take all those different perspectives into account. So it's not just a question of saying, let's limit the use of the sea to protect it. And we're all in agreement here that we need to introduce more initiatives to protect the sea, but we have to look at the protection of the sea also from other perspectives. And I was listening to President Macron today, and he mentioned this important initiative where to protect cetaceans, we're discussing the issue of limiting the speed of marine vessels in certain areas. And that's a good initiative for sure. But that will probably result in increased shipping times, probably leading to increased transportation costs in the maritime sector. Would that my question would be then, would that lead to increased inflationary costs? And would we be able to offload those increased inflationary costs to our people at this particular moment in time? So what I'm saying is, yes, let's consider all these important initiatives, but let's have a holistic view of the different impacts which each initiative would leave. And what have we done in Malta to strike a balance? I believe that the solution to these different perspectives is to strike the right balance. And one of the main incentives which we did to protect perhaps our main asset, our best asset, is the introduction of 2 ship-to-shore facilities, and one of them has been made possible due to important EU funds. Basically, these facilities will allow ships to switch off their electricity generators, the electricity engines, in harbour, allowing them to switch off these engines and thus reducing emissions. But the irony of it all is that whilst we have done this incentive, whilst these ships are cruising around our islands, whilst these ships are cruising in the Mediterranean, they're using heavy fuel oil. And that is the reality which we're facing. So yes, Nikos mentioned earlier the electrification and the propulsion of marine-going vessels. That's a very important initiative. But I ask, how are vessels today still using heavily polluting, heavy fuel oil? When we have cleaner fuels available, albeit at a higher cost. Why are marine-going vessels still using high-sulfur gas oil? And I understand that the reply to that question is cost. But then we have to walk the walk and talk the talk. Whilst we're discussing initiatives for the future, we have solutions in the present which we're not utilizing. Yes, I do understand that using low-sulfur diesel would perhaps ramp up costs in the shipping industry, but it's an immediately available solution which I believe we should avail ourselves of. And the smaller solutions then, perhaps the minor or less grand solutions which taken together make an effective difference. Let's take the example of the SCAP. A few months ago, probably that would have been made of a disposable single-use plastic. In Malta, a few months ago, we made an important change where we introduced a ban on the importation of single-use plastics. Following 12 months after then, we introduced a total ban on the sale of disposable single-use plastics. It was perhaps a small change, but it made a huge difference. One thing which really saddens me is going around the island and seeing bits of plastic floating all around the island when there are certain currents. We have made major efforts to limit that. And I think that those are the major changes where we have to strive for. But my final appeal then will be to go back to what I started off with, the striking of the right balance. So yes, let us discuss further initiatives where we can improve the quality of our seas, where we can improve the quality of our environment, of our air quality as well. But let's look at each and every initiative from a holistic perspective, not ignoring the realities, the specificities, which Nico also mentioned, of small island states which face particular realities, which rely on the sea for their economy, for the well-being of their people. And I believe that such a balance can be indeed found, provided that we are ambitious in our targets and we also accept that the environment, the protection of our environment is indeed one of the greater challenges which we have, but a challenge which we can definitely look up to. Thank you.
Très bien. Merci. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Alors nous avons des invités, pas des invités surprises, des invités qui sont des Européens, qui viennent de loin, ou en tout cas qui voyagent loin. Et je voudrais vraiment vous dire que c'est une photo assez rare en fait. Ces quatre grands CEO de SEMA, CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, Maersk et MSC, ce sont les quatre CEO des quatre, parmi les 5 plus grandes entreprises au monde, de compagnies de transport maritime par conteneur, qui représentent elles-mêmes 92% du commerce maritime, du commerce mondial, pardon. Donc c'est considérable, mais à vous quatre, vous ne remplissez que 55% du commerce maritime. C'est-à-dire que l'Europe est puissante. Charles Michel, vous le savez très bien, 55%, et je voudrais vraiment vous remercier. Je ne sais pas si vous voyez souvent, il y a certainement de la concurrence, pour ne pas dire plus, de la compétition, mais ensemble, aujourd'hui, vous vous engagez et